A wealthy woman demanded that a humble elderly man get off the plane because he smelled of animals, but she had no idea who the old man really was. São Paulo International Airport was bustling with activity that summer morning, and among the crowd of hurried travelers, one figure stood out: an elderly man dressed in simple clothes and a worn-out straw hat. His name was Joaquim Oliveira, a farmer from rural Minas Gerais, carrying not only a battered suitcase, but also the weight of news that would forever change the course of his life. Joaquim walked slowly towards the boarding gate, curiously observing his surroundings. It was his first time flying, and despite his anxiety, there was an excited gleam in his wrinkled brown eyes. When he reached the check-in counter, he presented his ticket with hands rough from years of hard labor. The young attendant smiled kindly, noticing his confused expression. "First class, Mr. Oliveira. You must have quite the special journey ahead," she said, as she handed him the boarding pass. Joaquim scratched his head, a bit puzzled. "First class? There must be a mistake, miss. I just wanted a regular seat." The attendant checked the ticket again and confirmed, "No mistake, sir. Your seat is indeed in first class. Enjoy your flight." Still bewildered, Joaquim continued toward the boarding area, unaware that this journey would be far more than just his first flight. Meanwhile, across the terminal, an elegantly dressed woman caught everyone's attention as she passed by. Helena Mendonça, a well-known São Paulo socialite, strode through the airport as if she were on a runway, her high heels echoing on the polished floor. Helena was the complete opposite of Joaquim in every way. While he embodied simplicity and humility, she was the epitome of luxury and arrogance. Her icy blue eyes scanned the people around her with cold judgment. Arriving at the first-class boarding gate, Helena was greeted with respect by the airport staff, barely acknowledging them as she focused on her messages on a state-of-the-art smartphone. That's when fate intervened. Joaquim and Helena found themselves side by side in the first-class boarding line. The earthy smell of the farm clung to Joaquim's simple clothes, and Helena's delicate nose wrinkled in disgust. She couldn't help but make a snide remark. "My goodness, what's that smell? It's like someone brought the whole barn on board." Joaquim, who had been admiring the airplane through the terminal window, turned to Helena in confusion. "Excuse me, did you say something?" Helena looked him up and down, her lips curling into a sneer. "Yes, I think you're in the wrong line. Economy class is further down." "No," Joaquim replied politely, showing his boarding pass. "The lady up front told me this is my seat." Helena's face twisted in a mix of disbelief and disgust. "This is unacceptable. How can they let someone like you travel in first class?" Without waiting for a response, Helena rushed to an airline staff member, her tone now commanding. "I need to speak to someone in charge, right away. There's been a serious mistake here." An employee, intimidated by Helena's authoritative stance, stammered a reply. Yes, ma'am, I'll call the supervisor." As the drama unfolded, Joaquim stayed silent, feeling embarrassed and confused by the whole situation. He had never imagined his first flight would turn into such an ordeal. Minutes later, which felt like hours to Joaquim, the airline supervisor arrived with 2 security guards. Helena immediately approached, her voice filled with indignation. "This person cannot fly in first class. Look at him. He reeks of animals and is dirtying everything. I demand he be removed at once." The supervisor, a middle-aged man with a tired expression, tried to calm the situation. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but if the passenger has a valid ticket—" Helena rudely interrupted him. "Do you even know who I am? I'm Helena Mendonça, and my husband is one of the largest shareholders of this airline. If this isn't resolved immediately, I assure you there will be consequences." The supervisor's face turned pale as he recognized the name. He turned to Joachim, who watched the scene with a mix of sadness and resignation. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we'll have to move you to economy class. It's our policy to ensure the comfort of all passengers." Joachim, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on him, simply nodded. "All right, I don't want to cause trouble for anyone." As he was escorted out of first class, Joachim overheard Helena's triumphant voice. "Finally, now we can have a civilized flight." The old farmer was relocated to a cramped seat in the back row of economy. As he settled in, he pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket. Inside were the results of his medical exams and a diagnosis that gave him only a few years to live. Joachim sighed, tucking the envelope back away. This trip to São Paulo, meant to mark a new chapter in his life, had begun on a sour note. But he was a simple, wise man who knew that sometimes life gives you lemons. And with lemons, he thought, with a resigned smile, you can always make lemonade. The plane took off, carrying not just passengers, but also the beginning of a story that would intertwine destinies in unexpected ways. In the luxury of first class, Helena basked in her momentary victory, unaware of how her actions that day would ripple through her future. Meanwhile, in economy class, Joachim closed his eyes, dreaming of the plans he had for his son and the future of his farm. 6 months had passed since the airport incident. In a charming cafe in the heart of São Paulo, a young woman sat anxiously, her fingers tapping on the marble table. Luis Mendonça, Helena's daughter, was the image of discreet elegance, so different from her mother's extravagance. Her green eyes nervously scanned the room until they finally landed on the figure entering through the door. A smile lit up her face as she saw Pedro, her boyfriend of almost a year. Pedro Oliveira was a tall, handsome young man with dark, tousled hair that gave him a charmingly casual look. He dressed simply but stylishly in a crisp white shirt and well-fitted jeans. "Sorry I'm late," he said, leaning in to give Louis a gentle kiss. Traffic was terrible. Louis smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "No worries, I just got here myself." Their conversation was lively as they discussed their days, dreams, and future plans. Any casual observer would notice the sparkle in their eyes, the kind of connection that exists only between two truly in-love individuals. "You know," Pedro began after a brief pause, "there's something I've been wanting to tell you for a while." Louis leaned forward, intrigued. "What is it?" Pedro hesitated for a moment, carefully choosing his words. "It's about my family. You know I don't talk much about them, but I think it's time you meet my dad." Louis' face lit up. "Really? That would be wonderful. I've always wanted to meet your family." "Well," Pedro continued, "my dad isn't exactly what you might be imagining. He's a simple man, a farmer." Louis frowned, puzzled. "But didn't you say your family was in the agriculture business?" Pedro smiled, a bit nervously. "Yes, that's true. But my dad prefers a simpler life. He personally manages our main farm in Minas Gerais. He's a man of the land, you know." Louis' expression softened. "That sounds lovely. I can't wait to meet him." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in a luxurious office atop a skyscraper, Helena Mendonça was engaged in a heated phone conversation. "What do you mean the Oliveira farm isn't for sale?" she practically yelled into the phone. "Offer more. Everyone has a price." Frustrated, Helena slammed the phone down, her irritation evident. She walked over to the panoramic window, gazing at the sprawling city below. Her real estate empire was on the verge of closing the biggest deal in its history, a luxury resort in rural Minas Gerais. Everything was perfect except for one detail: the Oliveira farm, a strategically located piece of land that refused to sell. Alberto, she called her assistant, get the car ready. We're going to pay a visit to this Oliveira farm. I want to see in person what kind of fool refuses an offer like ours. As Helena prepared for her unexpected trip, Joaquim Oliveira stood on his farm, watching the sunset from his porch, his thoughts far away. He recalled the conversation he had with his son earlier that day. Dad, Pedro had said, I want you to meet someone very special to me. Joaquim smiled, remembering the sparkle in his son's eyes, just like the sparkle he had seen in his late wife's eyes. Of course, my son. When can we go this weekend? Now, looking at the horizon painted in shades of orange and pink, Joaquim felt a mix of emotions: joy for his son, anxiety about the meeting, and a touch of sadness thinking about the little time he had left. His mind wandered to the events of the past few months: the trip to São Paulo, the humiliating airport incident, and the news he had received from the doctors. All of it had led him to make crucial decisions about the future of the farm and the family. Joaquim had dedicated every moment since then to perfecting his latest invention: a revolutionary irrigation system that could transform arid land into fertile fields. It was his legacy, something that would change not just his family's future, but potentially the lives of thousands of farmers across the country. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Joaquim could not have imagined how the events of the coming days would intertwine his fate with that of the woman who had humiliated him months earlier. As their meeting concluded, Louis smiled brightly. So it's settled. This weekend, we'll visit your dad at the farm. Pedro nodded, a hint of nervousness in his voice. Yes, I can't wait for you to meet him. He's an amazing man. Simple, yet filled with wisdom that's hard to find nowadays. Louis affectionately squeezed Pedro's hand. I'm sure I'll love him. And who knows, maybe soon we can introduce our families. My mum will be so excited to get to know you better. Pedro hesitated for a moment, a shadow flickering across his expression. Of course, one step at a time, right? As the couple parted with a gentle kiss, neither could foresee the storm brewing on the horizon. Helena was resolute in her quest to acquire the farm at any cost, while Joaquim prepared to welcome his son and his girlfriend. In the midst of it all, Pedro and Louis were blissfully lost in their love, unaware that their worlds were about to collide dramatically. The unpredictable hand of fate had rolled the dice. Now it was just a matter of how each piece of this intricate puzzle would fit together and what the consequences would be when the truth finally emerged. Night fell over São Paulo, bringing with it the foreboding of tumultuous days ahead that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. The stage was set, the actors in place, and the drama on the verge of unfolding. The sun had barely risen when Helena Mendonça left São Paulo, heading towards the countryside of Minas Gerais. Her private driver maneuvered the luxurious SUV along winding roads while she sat in the back, furiously typing on her tablet, reviewing documents and strategies for the upcoming negotiation. Alberto, she called to her assistant, who sat beside her. Are you sure we have all the information on this farm? Alberto, a thin, middle-aged man with fine-framed glasses, nodded nervously. Yes, ma'am. The Oliveira farm has been in the family for generations. The current owner is Joaquim Oliveira, a 68-year-old widower with just one son. Helena smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. Perfect. An old, lonely farmer won't stand a chance against me. By the end of the day, that land will be ours. Meanwhile, at the Oliveira farm, Joaquim awoke to the sound of roosters crowing. Despite his age and the illness gradually consuming him, he kept to his routine of rising early to personally oversee the start of work on the farm. That morning, however, the air felt charged with excitement. Pedro would be arriving soon, bringing along the girlfriend he was eager to introduce. Joaquim smiled at the thought of his son. Pedro was his greatest joy and the reason he continued to fight, even in light of the grim diagnosis he had received. Strolling through the lush fields, Joaquim paused to admire his latest project, the revolutionary irrigation system he had developed. It was a sight that filled him with pride and hope. This invention could transform the future of agriculture in the country, and he could hardly wait to share it with Pedro. As the morning progressed, Joaquim soon heard the sound of an approaching vehicle, his heart swelling with anticipation, thinking it might be Pedro arriving early. However, as he turned to look, he saw a vehicle that clearly didn't belong in the area. Helena's SUV parked in front of the main house of the farm. She stepped out, her high heels sinking slightly into the soft earth, and grimaced, clearly uncomfortable in the surroundings. "Hello," she called out. Joaquim approached with a friendly smile. "How can I assist you?" Helena turned, ready to unleash her negotiating charm, but froze when she saw Joaquim's face. For a moment, a flicker of recognition crossed her eyes, quickly overshadowed. "Good morning," she said, collecting herself. "I'm looking for Señor Joaquim Oliveira. I'm Helena Mendonça, CEO of Mendonça Enterprises." Joaquim immediately recognized the woman who had humiliated him at the airport months ago. His smile faltered for an instant, but he chose to remain polite. "That's me, Mum. How may I help you?" Unaware she stood before the man she had belittled, Helena launched into her rehearsed pitch about the benefits of selling the farm to her company, discussing astronomical figures, regional development, and unique opportunities. Joaquim listened patiently, his expression calm. When she finished, he simply replied, "Thank you for your interest, Señora Mendonça, but this farm is not for sale. It's my family's legacy, and I intend to keep it that way." Helena's face twisted with surprise and irritation. She wasn't used to hearing no. "Señor Oliveira, perhaps you don't grasp the magnitude of my offer. With this money, you could live comfortably for the rest of your life." Joaquim smiled gently. "Ma'am, life isn't measured solely by comfort or wealth. This land is my history, my present, and my son's future. No amount of money can replace that." Before Helena could respond, the sound of another car approaching caught everyone's attention. It was Pedro arriving with Louis. The young couple stepped out of the vehicle, confused by the scene before them. Joaquim, Helena, Alberto, and the driver all paused in the yard of the farm. "Dad," Pedro called, cautiously approaching. "Is everything okay?" Joaquim's face broke into a wide smile at the sight of his son. "Pedro, so good to see you." He turned to Helena, who was growing increasingly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, if you'll excuse me, I have guests to welcome. As I mentioned, the farm is not for sale. Have a good trip back." Helena, taken aback by the direct rejection, struggled to find a response. Her gaze shifted from Joaquim's serene face to Pedro, and then froze as she nearly recognized her own daughter. "Louis," Helena exclaimed, disbelief in her voice. "What are you doing here?" Louis, equally shocked to see her mother in such an unexpected place, stammered, "Mum, I came to meet Pedro's dad." A heavy silence fell over the group as they each processed the surprising implications. For Helena, a painful understanding began to dawn on her face. Joaquim broke the silence first, his calm demeanor masking the storm of emotions within. "Well, it seems we have much to discuss. Why don't we all go inside for some coffee?" The living room of the farmhouse, usually a cozy and tranquil space, was filled with palpable tension. Joaquim, Pedro, Louis, and Helena sat around the dining table, steaming cups of coffee before them, but none dared to take a sip. Alberto and Helena's driver had discreetly excused themselves, leaving the two families to confront the delicate situation at hand. Pedro was the first to shatter the oppressive silence. Can someone explain what's happening here? His voice trembled slightly, caught between confusion and growing realization. Joachim sighed deeply. Joachim's gaze shifted among the faces gathered at the table. "Son," he began, "it seems destiny has played a trick on us, intertwining our lives in an unexpected way." Elena, who had maintained an expression of shock and indignation, finally found her voice. "Louisa, did you know about this? Did you know who your boyfriend's family was?" The last words dripped with accusation. Still dazed by the circumstances, Louise shook her head. "No, Mum, I had no idea. Pedro never went into detail about his family. He only mentioned that his father was a farmer." Pedro nodded in agreement. "It's true. I wanted Louis to meet my dad for who he is, not based on what we have or don't have." Helena scoffed in disbelief. "Not based on what you have? Pedro, do you realize the value of this property? The potential you're throwing away?" Joachim interrupted, his voice surprisingly steady. "I believe there are more important matters to discuss right now than the monetary worth of this land." Using his first name took Helena by surprise. She looked at Joachim, really seeing him for the first time since arriving. Something in his eyes, in the way he carried himself, stirred an uncomfortable memory. "We've met before, haven't we?" she asked, uncertainty creeping into her normally confident tone. Joachim nodded slowly. "Yes, Senora Mendonça. We crossed paths a few months ago on a flight to Sao Paulo, though I must say the circumstances were less than pleasant." Helena's face drained of color as she recalled the incident at the airport, the realization of her past actions crashing down on her like a bucket of cold water. Louis, sensing that something serious had transpired, glanced anxiously between her mother and Pedro. "What happened?" she asked, voice trembling. "Was it you? You were the one who humiliated my dad back then?" Helena found herself speechless for the first time in years. Her usual arrogance felt like it had evaporated, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Joachim, observing the emotional turmoil unfolding, decided to take control. "What happened in the past is done," he said, his tone calm and measured. "We can't change it. What matters now is how we deal with the present and future." Turning to Pedro and Louis, who appeared on the verge of tears, he continued, "You two love each other. That's clear to anyone who sees you together. Don't let the mistakes or prejudices of others affect what you feel for one another." Helena, still struggling to regain her composure, looked at Joachim with a mix of confusion and reluctant admiration. "How can you be so understanding after what I did?" Joachim smiled sadly. "Ma'am, life is too short to hold on to grudges. Trust me, I know that better than anyone." He paused, contemplating whether to share his secret. Deciding that honesty was best, he continued, "I've been diagnosed with a rare illness. The doctors have given me only a few years to live." The revelation hit the room like a bombshell. Pedro, already aware of his father's condition, bowed his head, fighting back tears. Louis gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Helena, on the other hand, felt as if the ground had been ripped from beneath her. I didn't know," she murmured. All her earlier bravado vanished. Joachim nodded. "Few know, but that's why every day, every moment is so precious to me. That's why this farm, this legacy I want to leave for Pedro, means so much. It's not about land or money, Senora Mendonça. It's about family, about building something that will endure beyond our own time." A heavy silence fell over the room as everyone processed Joachim's words. Gathering his courage, Pedro finally spoke up. "Dad, I want you to know that I plan to carry on your work here at the farm, your inventions. I will do everything I can to ensure your legacy lives on." With tears in her eyes, Louise squeezed Pedro's hand. "And I'll be by your side, no matter what happens." Helena watched the scene unfold, feeling entirely out of place. Her entire life had revolved around business, profits, and social standing. Witnessing the love and commitment in this simple family made her question her own priorities for the first time in a long while. She began, her voice trembling. "I apologize for what happened on the plane, for trying to buy your land, for everything." Joaquim looked at Helena, seeing beyond her ruthless businesswoman facade. "I accept your apology, Señora Mendonça, and I hope we can all learn something from this situation." He slowly stood up and walked toward the window, where the afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the farm fields. "Come," he beckoned, gesturing for everyone to gather around. "I want to show you something." As the group gathered by the window, Joaquim began to discuss his innovative irrigation system, the plans he had to sustainably expand the farm's production, and the bright future he envisioned for the land. In that moment of action and reconciliation, something started to shift. For the first time, Helena saw beyond the monetary value of the land. Pedro and Louis felt their love deepening through adversity, and Joaquim, observing them, experienced a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The future remained uncertain, with many loose ends to tie up. But that afternoon in the living room of a farm in Minas Gerais, the first steps were taken toward mutual understanding and perhaps healing long-festering wounds. In the weeks that followed the turbulent meeting at the farm, a tense calm settled between the Oliveira and Mendonça families. Pedro and Louis, determined not to let circumstances disrupt their relationship, dove headfirst into the farm projects. On a sunny morning, Pedro walked through the fields with Louis, enthusiastically explaining the details of his father's irrigation system. "Look, Louis," he pointed to a series of nearly invisible pipes snaking through the soil. "This system not only conserves water, but also distributes nutrients more efficiently. It's revolutionary." Louis, who had always lived in the city, was captivated. "It's amazing. Your dad is a genius." Meanwhile, at Mendonça Enterprises in São Paulo, Helena was lost in thought. The meeting at the farm had affected her more than she cared to admit. Joaquim's passionate talk about his land, even in the face of terminal illness, lingered in her mind. "Alberto," she called her assistant, "cancel all my appointments for tomorrow. I'm going to take a trip." The next morning, to everyone's surprise, Helena Mendonça returned to the Oliveira farm. This time, however, she had shed her arrogant demeanor and high heels for attire more suitable for the rural setting, and she wore a look of genuine curiosity. Joaquim welcomed her on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand. "Señora Mendonça, what a surprise! What do we owe this honor?" Helena hesitated. For a moment, before responding, Joaquim said, "I came to learn about the farm, about your work. If you're willing to teach me, of course." The old farmer raised his eyebrows in surprise, but a warm smile formed on his lips. "Well, in that case, let's begin our lesson." Over the next few hours, Joaquim guided Helena through the farm, explaining every detail of the irrigation system, the cultivation methods, and future plans. Helena listened intently, asking questions and making mental notes. "You know, Helena," Joaquim said as they watched the sunset from the porch, "when I received my diagnosis, I thought it was the end. But now I realize it's just the beginning of something greater." Helena looked at him, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "This system we've developed here," he explained, "can change the lives of countless farmers in arid regions, but it needs someone with business insight to take it to the next level." Helena's eyes widened as she grasped the implication. Are you suggesting a partnership? Joachim nodded. Exactly. Your business experience combined with our technology, imagine the impact we could make. At that moment, something shifted within Helena. The idea of using her talents for something beyond personal gain ignited a spark she hadn't realized was there. Joachim, she said, extending her hand, I think we have a deal. Meanwhile, Pedro and Louis, who had been watching from a distance, exchanged hopeful glances. Perhaps they thought the wounds were healing, and Louis added, but I think I'm falling in love with country life. Joachim smiled, his eyes shining with a mix of amusement and affection. Helena, I'll soon see you driving a tractor. Laughter erupted, including from Helena, who seemed lighter and happier than Louis had seen in years. After lunch, while others chatted on the porch, Pedro pulled Louis aside to a quieter spot in the garden. Louis, he began, his heart racing. These past months have been crazy, with everything that's happened between our families and the farm project. Louis nodded, smiling. It's been quite the roller coaster. Pedro took a deep breath, gathering courage. You know, all of this has only made me more certain about what I want for our future. He knelt down and pulled a small box from his pocket. Louis gasped, tears welling in her eyes. Louis Mendonça, Pedro said, his voice trembling with emotion, would you honor me by marrying me? Louis' response was immediate and enthusiastic. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Their joyous shouts drew the attention of others who quickly gathered to celebrate the engagement. Joachim, watching the scene with tears in his eyes, felt a wave of gratitude. Despite the illness still consuming him, he was witnessing the start of a new chapter filled with hope for his family. Helena, in turn, surprised everyone by hugging Joachim spontaneously. Thank you, she whispered, for teaching me the true value of things. As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the farm in golden hues, the group remained together, sharing stories, laughter, and plans for the future. The farm, once a source of conflict, had now become the backdrop for an unlikely but profoundly meaningful union. Joachim, seated in his favorite rocking chair, observed it all with a serene smile. He knew his time was limited, but he also understood he was leaving behind a legacy far greater than himself. He never imagined not only a thriving farm or groundbreaking technology, but a close-knit family, exemplifying how forgiveness and understanding can change lives. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Joachim silently expressed gratitude for every challenge faced, every lesson learned, and most importantly, for witnessing love and hope bloom in what was once a barren land of prejudice and misunderstanding. The night wore on, but it was evident to everyone present that this was merely the start of a new and thrilling journey. The year following Pedro and Louis' engagement was filled with significant transformations and obstacles. The startup established to develop and distribute Joachim's irrigation system, named Waters of Tomorrow, began to gain national acclaim. Immersed in her new mission, Helena surprised everyone with her commitment, splitting her time between São Paulo and the farm, often preferring the countryside's fresh air to her urban apartment's comforts. On one particularly warm afternoon, Helena and Joachim sat beneath the shade of a large mango tree, discussing the latest project updates. You know, Joachim, Helena began thoughtfully, sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if we hadn't met that day. Joachim smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Fate has curious ways of working, doesn't it? Helena nodded, tears unexpectedly filling her eyes. I was so empty, always chasing after more money and power, and now, she gestured broadly at the farm, I feel like I'm truly making a difference. Joachim gently placed his hand over hers. You've always had that potential within you, Helena. Sometimes we just need a little nudge to see what truly matters. Meanwhile, Pedro and Louis were fully immersed in wedding preparations, deciding to hold the ceremony on the farm, symbolizing the union not just between them, but their families as well. One evening, while working on the invitations, Louis noticed Pedro was quieter than usual. "Is everything okay, love?" she asked with concern. Pedro hesitated before responding. "It's my father, Louis. He's getting weaker every day. I'm scared. Scared he won't be here to see our wedding." Louis hugged her fiancé tightly. "Your father is the strongest man I've ever known, Pedro. He will be there, I'm sure." Her words were comforting, but the reality of Joaquim's condition loomed over them like a dark cloud. Treatments were becoming increasingly difficult, and while Joaquim tried to stay positive, it was clear his health was rapidly declining. It was within this context that Helena had a bold idea. At a family meeting, she proposed, "What if we move the wedding up? We could have an intimate ceremony right here on the farm." The suggestion was met with a mix of surprise and excitement. Pedro and Louis exchanged looks, a silent conversation passing between them. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Joaquim said, his voice weak but filled with emotion. "Nothing would make me happier than seeing my son get married." The decision was unanimous. In the days that followed, the farm became a whirlwind of activity as staff and family came together to organize what promised to be a simple yet profoundly significant event. He had witnessed so many transformations in their lives as Pedro and Louis exchanged their vows. Joaquim, supported by Helena, watched with tears in his eyes as his son embarked on a new journey. The ceremony was a testament to the love and unity that had blossomed from such unexpected circumstances. As the newlyweds danced beneath the soft lights draped across the trees, Joaquim observed with a serene smile, murmuring to himself, "It was all worth it. Every single moment was worth it." The months following the wedding were bittersweet. Joaquim's health continued to deteriorate, yet he faced each day with remarkable determination. His enthusiasm for the Waters of Tomorrow project seemed to provide him with extra strength, and he spent countless hours brainstorming ideas and plans with Helena, Pedro, and Louis. One autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled in the breeze, Joaquim asked to be taken to the field where his irrigation system had first been set up. "I want to see the results of our efforts one last time," he said, his voice frail but full of emotion. Helena, who had become a steady and comforting presence in recent months, pushed his wheelchair while Pedro and Louis walked beside him, hands intertwined. When they arrived at the field, breathtaking rows of lush crops stretched as far as the eye could see, a vivid testament to the success of his invention. "Isn't it beautiful?" Joaquim remarked, his eyes sparkling. "To think this can assist so many people, so many families." Helena knelt beside his chair, holding his aged hand in hers. "And it will, Joaquim. Your legacy will impact lives for generations." That night, gathered on the farmhouse porch, Joaquim requested to address everyone. "My dear ones," he began, his voice soft but filled with affection. "I cannot express how grateful I am to have you in my life. Pedro, my son, you have brought me immense pride. Louis, you have added an extra light to our family, and Helena." He paused, exchanging a significant look with her. "You've shown me that it's never too late to change or grow." He took a deep breath before continuing. "The Waters of Tomorrow project represents more than a business or an invention. It symbolizes how we can overcome our differences and how love and understanding can flourish in the most unlikely places." Joaquim gazed at each of them, his eyes filled with emotion. "Promise me you will continue this work, not merely for profit, but to truly impact people's lives." Tears streamed freely down their faces. In the following weeks, Joaquim grew weaker, but even in his final days, he kept his spirits high, always offering kind words or wise advice. Then, on a peaceful winter night, Joaquim Oliveira passed away quietly in his sleep, surrounded by those he cherished. His funeral became a celebration of his life and legacy, with farmers from the region coming to pay their respects, many sharing stories of how Joachim's generosity and innovations had transformed their lives. As the coffin was lowered into the earth, Helena approached Pedro and Louis, who were embracing. "My father," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "taught me the true meaning of wealth. It's not about money or power. It's about the impact we leave on the world and the lives we touch." Pedro nodded, wiping away his tears. "And we will carry on his work. Let's spread his dream across the country and around the globe, and we'll ensure the next generation knows the story of their grandfather, the man who transformed not just the land, but also hearts," Louis said, placing a protective hand on her gently rounded belly, a surprise they had discovered just weeks earlier. In the years that followed, the Oliveira farm became much more than a simple rural property. It evolved into a hub of agricultural innovation, attracting researchers and farmers from all over the world. The Waters of Tomorrow project expanded, bringing hope and prosperity to regions once deemed uninhabitable. Helena, now a doting grandmother, split her time between business and precious moments with her growing family. She often found herself gazing at the portrait of Joachim hanging in the farmhouse, silently thanking the man who had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined. Pedro and Louis, now parents of two, continued Joachim's legacy with passion and dedication, ensuring the story of their father, the simple farmer who dreamed big and even bigger, was passed down to inspire future generations. Thus, the Oliveira farm stood as a living testament to how love, understanding, and vision can transform lives and unite people from the most diverse backgrounds. Joachim's legacy thrived not just in the lush, productive fields, but in the hearts of all those he had touched with his wisdom, kindness, and unconditional love.